Hello, this is your host Todd Lewis of the Praise of Folly podcast. I'm going to do like, share, and subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Don't forget to follow me on Telegram, Twitter, and Facebook, and you can support the channel on Subscribestar Locals and Buy Me a Coffee. Once again, joined by Florian. Glad to have you back, Florian. So we're here to discuss Grok and its uses. This will be somewhat similar to Tuesday's show. So we'll start with you, Florian. You use Grok both, professionally, I assume, and also just, for fun on the side for whatever your hobby projects are. What do you say Grok is really good at? What do you think is like where Grok's strengths are as a tool?
Reasoning I think Grok is really good at reasoning, and it's a little bit better at that than ChatGPT. It's more, my impression is it's more engineering, more geared towards engineering, which would make sense given that X and Tesla, that's all heavy on engineering. Then the sources from which Sam Altman put his company together, I think in a way, Elon Musk's company are a little bit more libertarian than the Silicon Valley um, Silicon Valley groups were before, from which OpenAI is coming, right? So from the get-go, ChatGPT was more politically correct than Grok.
Yeah, now Grok is, of course, still more quote unquote right coded than ChatGPT, but it still does have biases, which I think I'll restate this here because it's actually a point that I made Tuesday, but I think it's very useful. Is that these are, of course, ultimately for-profit products that are being produced, and so someone like Musk, who sort of he behaves in a right-coded fashion, but we're not really sure if he's right wing or not because he does some stuff on the edges that are like, well, wait a minute, it doesn't sound like it's right wing. Think like the H-1B visa thing at the year and a half ago,
Yeah.
where everybody got mad at him for the H-1Bs, even though he's supposed to be like a right wing guy, right? Grok is to maximize sales, you have to straddle the fence, right? If you go too far left, you lose the right wing customers, and if you go too far right, you lose the left wing or centrist customers. Either one of those are bad because that means Musk loses money, right? So, in a sense, I think Grok is probably not that different from ChatGPT. It's just right coded in order to get people to want to use it. And we've seen, I remember seeing a couple weeks ago, somebody asked Grok, can I become a woman? And it said yes. I'm like, hey, Elon, what's up with this? You're supposed to be right wing here, right? That's something ChatGPT would say or whatever, right? So
Yeah.
that's interesting. That's
Well,
definitely it. Go ahead.
well, then if that's about profits, then which basically I'm there were times when I wasn't so sure anymore. For big corporations, it's about making profit, because so many corporations, like there was these catastrophes during 2016, 2020 with Gillette, for example. They had these all like left wing LGBTQ pro commercials, and they lost a lot of men with that, but they didn't seem to care because they were ideologically captured. The problem is with the traditional pro-family, right-wing conservative man is not a good customer, right? He will not put. He will think twice whether he should really pay the money. We don't really need that product, so that's why companies will sell mostly to women and to gay people. That's also one reason why you have many gay people in all modern movies and everything. Those are the groups that are emotionally that are driving that are very affluent, and they're driving buying purchasing decisions more on emotional grounds. Those are the people you reach more easily when you want to sell things, right? I'm not talking about repair shops that repair your car. No, I'm talking about consumerist industry, right? And since everything has sort of been taken over by consumerism, then the reason then is that you have more women as customers, and more and also more LGBTQ. You just don't have the middle class family man as a customer, and that's why everything commercial is already automatically more left wing red.
Yeah. Now to your point about losing money with like the era of the woke, beginning with Obama up
Yeah.
to Trump's second term. So this is how I view that, right? Part of this is, on the one hand, we need to make a distinction between a company that is operating on a for-profit basis and then acting on correct information. So we might say that, okay, they were, I would argue they were still operating on a for-profit basis, but they were operating on incorrect information due to the hiring they had done, which hired a whole bunch of woke people, right? And once you do that, it's not very easy to change your horse midstream. You then have to maybe wait for the contract to expire and then hire somebody new, or and also these people live in bubbles, right? The CEOs, the shareholders, they live in a bubble. They're not going to walk out and see the rest of us. So as long as they're not getting the red meat takes that you and I are, right, they're not going to even know that, right? So part of that, I think, is that, right?
It can go to extremes, though. I mean, maybe you remember, like, I think 1 year ago, Jaguar, like the sports car maker, they put their new ad campaign out, and it was a complete disaster because they were basically, the cars looked ugly, the cars didn't look masculine anymore. It was some sort of like weird, colorful, pro-woke, LGBTQ, whatever. It was like a real woke commercial, and that means you really don't understand your customer base if you think they're all woke that who buy Jaguars. With that seems to be like a blatant disregard of your customer base, more so than just not knowing. You need to be extremely dumb as a CEO if you think that is your customer base. But it may well be, as you said, they all live in bubbles. Could be, yep.
And
But
also, they might think that the market is large enough that the reliable customers will just be customers no matter what, right? That's maybe not a good assumption, but I'm sure a lot of corporations make that assumption because it's like, well, we've already, quote, captured this market, unquote. We can just forget about it now and then cater to new markets, right? Which, of course, as we saw, didn't quite work that way. For me, though, with Grok, I would say that what Grok is really good at, it is a really good research assistant. You ask it a question, like, say, for example, summarize Baudrillard simulation. It's going to do a really good job of that, right? Or if you want to say, like, I don't know, pick a thinker like C.S. Lewis and ask Grok, maybe using Deep Seek or something, and say the Deep Search, whatever it was called, and then ask, what was C.S. Lewis's opinion on socialism? I mean, Grok would give you C.S. Lewis's opinion and comb the internet for it. So it's really good as a research assistant, right? It's also good at so if you want to steel man the opposition, right? As we all know, that's the most charitable thing to do, and it gives you an upper hand with the moral high ground in debates. Grok is insanely good for that. You pick an idea group that you want to debate with and just ask Grok to, like, represent that position and then go back and forth. That's going to prepare you to deal with that in a real life situation or debate very, very well, right? Because it has access to all the information that particular faction ideology group believes in, and then you just pitch it questions, right? And so it's really good at that too, right? Grok is also, of course, goes without saying, mathematical calculations. Any sort of calculation is going to be done well with Grok. So those are the areas I think Grok is good at. Now, where would you say, Florian, that Grok has limits, where it's not so effective as a tool?
Well, it's a good question. It's good as a research assistant, no doubt about that. And then there's a big debate whether AI in general is good in reasoning when it comes to mathematics or physics or just in general sciences, right? For example, I saw, and I think there is a misunderstanding that people think that the only reasoning can come from or the only way of providing mathematical knowledge or reasoning comes from understanding the laws behind it. And they say, yeah, well, the AI, especially large language models, they can never understand physical or mathematical laws, They're just like a stochastic parrot. I think that's the phrase people use. They are basically just trying to get to a sort of a conclusion, but with kind of like the weirdest laws. There's not a harmonic law behind it. There was like one picture I saw which illustrates that very, very well. If I just share my screen real quick. I don't know whether it's possible. I think this may be it. Can you see my screen?
Well, yeah, but do you see it here on the window here, Florian?
Yeah.
You've got sort of that feedback where it falls.
You see this here?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so I just wanted to show that. So basically, left is the classical Newtonian mechanic. They predict the trajectory of the Earth around the sun, right? And then there is a AI model that will predict the same trajectory, but it's like completely weird, arrows going in all directions. And so it cannot calculate the true force, but it can pretty well calculate the predicted force. And so this is just the way that AI works. You can predict things with it, but you cannot really understand it. And I think that's also something we need to keep in mind. Reasoning is not like in a classical way, like we came up with, like humans came up with physical laws or stuff like that. And I think I stopped sharing here. But it actually, we're not going back to some sort of universal law. We are using AI to predict something, which is very similar to what we get with our laws, right? And then somebody asked me, well, but you wouldn't go to a doctor that just basically makes the conclusions via coincidence and via stochastics. I said, yeah, well, if the AI doctor gets more things right or if the AI doctor makes less mistakes than a normal doctor makes, because they also make mistakes, then I would trust an AI doctor as well, right? So reasoning, for that reason, reasoning is different how AI does it. But I also read another statement by someone, like a computer science professor, and he asked the question, how is an atom bomb a compost heap? And the AI came to the conclusion that, well, of course they're different, but also inside a compost heap, the microbial reaction generates heat, and it's going to be like a chain reaction that is similar between the compost heap and a nuclear weapon. And so that is advanced reasoning in a way, right? That's not just some LLM adding new words, new words at the end of a sentence. No, that is some abstract reasoning. And in that way, AI can reason. And I asked Grok actually the same question, and Grok came to the same conclusion. So this AI can reason, but it's more based on prediction than on understanding a mechanism behind it, which makes sense because we want to understand the mechanism behind why the Earth goes around the sun, because it helps us to then draw more conclusions. But this doesn't help an AI. So the AI comes up with a different way of making predictions.
Yeah, I would push back a little bit on this. I don't think Grok is all that great at reasoning. So if we look at, well, okay, let me rephrase that. Right. If you have a premise and you reason to a conclusion, I think Grok is pretty good at that. But one of the things that here on my channel, we talk about a lot of Sherlock Holmes and the idea of reasoning analytically. So rather than starting from an axiom and reasoning to a conclusion, start from an observed fact and then reason back the chain of events that cause that fact, or all, like, so for example, a coroner determining time of death, right? We have a corpse for how it died and when it died. That's reasoning backwards or analytically, according to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. The other thing is, even if something isn't recorded in a sort of like scientific precision, you can still look for triggers in society that indicate this thing might be happening, right? So, for example, with regards to suicides after combat, we know after the global war on terror, a lot of soldiers, far more than died on the battlefield, committed suicide when they got home. Whereas that was not the case after the U.S. Civil War. In fact, after the U.S. Civil War, it seemed that most veterans, North and South, were able to reintegrate to society fairly easily, not like, say, Vietnam or the GWAT. And I'm like, okay, well, Grok, tell me, do we have any like accounts of, records, of suicide rates amongst soldiers? And it's like, well, that wasn't recorded. I'm like, well, okay, yeah, there wasn't a Bureau of Veteran Statistics. I know that, but other things were recorded, right? Like people dying were recorded. And, do we have a spike after 1865? Grok said, it did the search and said we didn't. I'm like, okay, well then, if it didn't spike after 1865, then that means there wasn't a lot of this that didn't happen, because it would have been recorded in some of. See, it would have been recorded in some other way, right? It would have been recorded in coroner reports, right? It would have been recorded in, death certificates, right? So just because it wasn't recorded one way doesn't mean it couldn't have been recorded other ways. And Grok didn't really follow that. So in my estimation, I think Grok needs some work when it comes on reasoning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's basically, the question is, of course, is the reasoning that we use just, maybe Grok would say humans need to reason better, because our reasoning, maybe that's just a crutch for us to understand things better and then to predict it, right? An AI doesn't need all these backwards reasoning skills. It can just like take the data and just make a brute force prediction going forward.
But if we're talking about the past, you can't really do that because data is limited. You have to make inferences, right? But the other thing is, we've also talked about how Grok has, quote, guardrails, right? You can't go outside of a certain accepted. No, granted, a few weeks ago, Musk took off the guardrails, and you had Mecha Hitler Grok, but that was, to be honest, that kind of seems like a stunt. I think that was the stunt where Musk just wanted to, gin up attention. No such thing as bad press and all that, right? So, but there are still very real limits, and a lot of them tend to be ideological, and that's where us guys on the right are going to be like, well, hold up, we don't really like that. That's not great. That's not great. Now, we could say on the one hand, that's just inevitable, because whenever any human puts something together like that, it's going to be an ideological assumption. But then the problem is it isn't made explicit. So you're using it, you won't necessarily know that right away, which then leads you to think, well, hold on a second, why weren't we told this, that it was going to be like this? And, there's reasons for that. But I think what we're learning about Grok in terms of like these guardrails and what is considered the baseline of reality that Grok works from, because it's trained on certain materials, means it isn't really as right-wing as a lot of people think it is. I think it's more just right coded in its language. That's what I think. It's not really right-wing, because again, the limits are there. It's just not as obvious as ChatGPT. ChatGPT is a little more, it's like the sensitive liberal, right? And so it's just going to like immediately flag you, right? But Grok is still it's more like a libertarian, right? It'll close ranks eventually. It just won't do it right away.
If I look at Twitter, I don't see, but maybe that's how my stream is adjusted. But also, I don't see. I see like the discussion on Twitter is right-wing libertarian. If you look to right-wing, there's no Burkean conservatism or something like that you find. You find that's what you find. There's also a lot of like commercialism. There's like Trump train, like these accounts that have like 20 symbols and light up like a Christmas tree. But I think I would find on Gab, I would probably find more conservative accounts under the right wing part. And they have their own AI. It's called Aria, which I haven't really checked into yet. That may be different, maybe different, right? It certainly will be different than Grok. I'm pretty sure about that. But yeah, I mean, no wonder if the old platform which Grok is trained is libertarian, right, left wing, probably with a slight left wing slant, then Grok will be very similar. So it's a tool, right? If you want to solve questions that are more geared towards engineering, yeah, you can use it as a research tool as well, certainly. But if you really expect life philosophy from Grok, probably not a good idea.
Well, and again, we can also add one more category to where Grok's really good, is if you want to have simulated conversations with people outside of your own bubble, where it's like, you want to talk to a liberal or even more extreme an anarchist, right? Just talk to somebody outside of your bubble. Grok can replicate that actually better than most of the rank and file could do. So that actually helps you steel man. I did that a lot with GPT-2 as well. And they're great at that. But the one thing that they're not doing, and I also have to say this, is they're not thinking, because I've made a whole bunch of arguments before on the channel why I don't think computers can ever think. But I think I'll give it to Noam Chomsky here. So once he was actually staying in his lane and talking about language, and he was asked on this podcast, do you think that whatever this is like before the quote AI revolution with Grok and ChatGPT, but it was like, do you think that with whatever we have here, we'll have thinking computers? And then Chomsky's like, no, a computer is a calculator, and you're just increasing its calculation speed. You're not going to have an equation where it's like increased calculation speed leads to thinking. He's like, that's not going to happen because it's a computer. It's a calculator. So in that regard, yeah, that's what it is. And it's a really good one. I mean, let's be clear. It's a really good one, but that's what it is. It's not HAL 9000.
Yeah, it's similar to chess computers, right? So we had one point until the 1990s, chess computers becoming better and better and better, but they were also just like brute forcing the number on different. They could basically think ahead because they were able to store different possibilities in their mind better than a human could, right? So in a way, chess computers is just brute force, and at one point, a chess computer could beat world champions in chess, and after that, everyone forgot about the chess computer and went ahead with doing real chess. People were afraid that at the point when the chess computers are better than actual human champions, then chess will be obsolete. But the opposite has happened, right? Look at CDs. CDs have crisp audio quality, but they basically put everything down in a digital format, and the digital format has such a high granularity that it's indistinguishable to non-trained ears from the old phone records. But now the large black records, they come back. They're seeing at least a moderate comeback, and people at one point aren't really fascinated by CDs anymore. And the same may actually happen with AI art, right? At one point, it becomes so perfect that nobody can keep up with it. And but then can either the entire branch of industry that dependent on human labor and that's outcompeted by AI, either that branch of industry is gone, or for whatever reason, AI gets ignored. And I think that is also an interesting perspective that may very well happen. It may be that there's no singularity where computers take over the world, and maybe it's just like people at one point just shrug their shoulders and say, okay, computer can only do so much in terms of human interaction and so on, right? They'll probably have some robots, sex robots and everything, but at one point people will then may as well realize that the robots are robots and don't replace humans. Like there could be a renaissance of people actually coming together and being in favor of analog interaction instead of digitalizing everything.
Yeah. The thing with now, what's interesting, I didn't want to talk about this much on Tuesday, but a lot of with like chat AI programs. One of the things that's interesting with those is a lot of people have all sorts of horror stories envisioned, and sure, I'm supposed that could happen. But I think what's kind of a possibility here, right? That's really interesting, kind of the white pill possibility. A lot of under-socialized individuals will be able to simulate socialized experiences with AI chat programs, and then learn to be able to better talk to people in meet space. because one of the things that they do in those programs is they try to be very agreeable. Now, that's, real people may or may not be agreeable, but those programs are. And if you can have a simulated dialogue and you don't really have that with people in your life, that might be the first ever you have where you have, like, I don't know, an hour-long dialogue with anything remotely human-like, right?
Yeah.
So one possible white pilling result of all this might be that.
Yeah, because in the end, I already see some kind of fatigue, right? And it's like people, sort of like people were angry that AI would be ideologically captured, but more and more, it's not people lose. I don't see AI entering the conversation as much anymore as it did in the past. So it seems like this has the initial excitement, positive or negative, is kind of fading, and people are saying, you know, um, it's it's not that big of a deal anymore, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
and it all depends, because if Grok gets and other engines get too much ideologically captured, then that adds to boredom on the long run, right? Because I mean, nobody believes those pro diversity slogans by corporations. There's just people just get bored with it and they just move on. And the same may happen to AI if it's too ideologically captured.
Well, the other thing too, as well, with AI, Florian, is that with as long as I've been alive, and you're older than me, so probably as long as you've been alive too, every time there's some sort of revolution in computing, and of course, AI tools like Grok are just one more iteration of that. We're right around the corner from HAL 9000, right? And I think part of the problem is we have the boy who cried wolf syndrome, where,
Yeah.
okay, we've been hearing this our whole lives. We never get HAL. Uh, you know, it's a nice computer algorithm, yeah, but it's not that, right? And so you kind of then have to tamp down the rhetoric at that point because you can't use it anymore. That's, I think, partly what might be happening. The other thing is, with these kinds of programs, not only do you have to worry about the ideological capture of the people who train the AI algorithm, right? And that, of course, is going to produce results may vary to use, when it comes to what you get back from it. But also, it's also the inputs given from people. Another reason, Florian, why AI might be flatlining here is it takes a certain level of intelligence and engagement and processing power to correctly use these tools in a way that is constructive and useful, right? And if you don't have a lot of those people, maybe they've got culture war burnout, maybe they've got work burnout, maybe they're sick, from just from everything. They're not going to be as effective at feeding it information, because one of the things that Newsfist and I talked about was the idea that you still have to input information to the thing for it to have a conception of reality to spit back at you. And if the people coding it can't give it a decent perception of reality, and you don't have one yourself, you have two delusional people talking to each other, and you just got to get selected out, because that's just not going to survive in the long run.
Well, if you talk about training data, then also there's another point somebody pointed out on X. Brian Rommel pointed it out. He is a I don't know who he is, but he talks a lot about AI, and he said that AI models have not captured the essence of the can-do ethos and the do-it-yourself mentality that propelled humanity into space and computers from 1870 to 1970, because internet training data is massively flawed by humanity-hating witty quips that took over by the early 2000s, right? So even a simple Pizza Hut commercial from '82 can transmit an energy that is not found in Reddit rebuttals, and that's also a problem, right? Because that's one reason that fatigue sets in, because basically AI and Grok and others start become like basically giant witty redditors, and then of course everyone gets bored by that, but that still doesn't mean that you get the old times back, right? And you get sort of like stuck on a loop that makes the whole entire society poorer because you get bored by AI, but you also don't have anything else. You don't have the raw data anymore to go back to. You don't have anything to remember how it was back in the 1960s and 1970s. And that can basically create a vacuum that is difficult to come out of.
Yeah, the other the other most obvious difference between AI and humans, which the transhumanists want to blur this line, is if you're in a conversation, Florian, with an interlocutor, you don't have to carry the conversation. The interlocutor might ask you a question. An LLM is not going to ask you a question unless you ask one first. So clearly, it's a very different kind of thing, because if you have Grok up on your computer and you just sit there for 2 hours and don't type anything, Grok's not going to do anything. If you sit there with a friend for 2 hours and say nothing, something's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
So there's that as well, right? Until it can like dynamically ask you questions and engage in a dialogue, instead of just spitting back responses to an input, it's not really anything. You can't even call it sentient like. It's not even that, right? It's something else. But and I think that's also interesting too, because we have the tech bros and the transhumanists and the people that want to like blur the line between machine and living things. And they're the ones that, of course, produce these AI tools, and of course, they're the ones that want to use them. And so, on the one hand, let's what is Grok? Grok is a for-profit product. So, okay, we know that. It's Grok. I mean, Musk wants to make money. It's a flagship for an idea. These language learning models. Okay, large language models. It's for that too. But thirdly, it has another role, and this is a propaganda role. Its goal is to, in the minds of the people who use it or hear about it, to blur the line between man and machine.
Yeah.
Now, does it actually do that? No, but the goal is, it's all about perception, right? That's sort of what the whole marketing gimmick, perception. So as long as you can generate the perception that you're narrowing the gap between man and machine, Grok is also quite useful ideologically for transhumanists. Now, it's kind of weird with Elon Musk, right? Because some people say he is a transhumanist, and they point to things like Neuralink, which definitely, to me, sounds a little sus in that department. But then they'll say he's like, a based right-wing guy who wants to have kids because he's pro-natalist. And it's like, well, it could just be that Elon Musk is Elon Musk, and he's not really a consistent thing either, right? That's also a possibility. A lot of these, like, genius autistes are like that, right? So, but I do think though that there's a propaganda value in large language models where they can create the illusion that they're reducing the distance between man and machine. But you see, what I would argue is, man and machine is an unbridgeable gap. It's just two different things, right? And that's also where you got transhumanism blurring into transgenderism, right? And yes, Grok can become a woman. Grok says yes. It's like, okay, well, I think we're beginning to see where this is really going.
Well, I think Elon Musk is a manifest destiny guy, and he basically sees going to Mars and his groundbreaking innovations. He sees that as grabbing the future real estate, and then basically his I think his appeals on getting more children are somewhat connected to his I don't know, call it insemination fetish, or now how do you call it?
In vitro
like
fertilization?
Fertilization fetish or anything, right? He has so many children with many different women. I mean, good for him, but it seems to me a little bit like he wants to sprout new seeds everywhere in this new frontier. So that's how, I mean, that's what this is about, I think. And so he's maybe not a transhumanist, but he's a digital manifest destiny guy, and wants to be the first one. He probably sees himself as an original settler on this new way west, like the old guys, but instead of having a like a wagon with horses drawn, he built a rocket to get to Mars. That's probably it. And
Yeah.
so he's not really a transhumanist, but whatever helps him move himself and humanity forward, that's how he will. That's what he will implement. And
Yeah.
Grok is a tool for him at that. But it's not. I don't think he wants to be. He wants to enlighten the whole humanity because I think I was a little bit more optimistic on Elon Musk 6 months ago, and but then he just threw a gasket because not every because Trump didn't implement everything he wanted to have, and then he started to sabotage the government, which to me is not someone who's interested in putting humanity on the right path forward. It's just that his personal goals and the benefit of humanity somewhat overlap, but he's not someone there who wants to put humanity into a new direction. I don't think that anymore.
Yeah, that a lot of people think that now. It's the first people to realize that were the because remember Musk initially positioned himself as a leftist, progressive, green energy, right? And a lot of those people have been unhappy with Musk because of his recent flirting with elements on the right. And one can speculate whether that's over or not because of how he's been dealing with Trump. But now I want to ask you this because I don't really follow like the Grok news and everything. But is Grok at the point where if it saves all of your conversations, and it can if you have like the paid version, it can save unless you delete them. Does it have like so? Here's the thing. So let's say you have like a year's worth of conversations, they're all saved. Mm-hmm. And then you log into Grok and you ask it the same question you asked at the beginning of the last year. Is it going to be able to remember and say, hey, you already asked me that question. This is the answer I gave last year.
That I don't know. I think it's a bit unwieldy, to be honest. Sometimes I go on the link where my conversation is supposed to be saved and it's gone. And so I think it's a little bit buggy. There's no feature where you save a conversation. And I don't trust that it automatically saves my conversation. I think it saves conversations it deems they're good enough to be kept in mind, and the others it forgets. I don't think the features are quite there, and I don't think it has been built to really explicitly save our conversations.
Well, because that would be the next step in a LLM. I would like to see it where it remembers my conversations so that if I were to ask the same question again, it would say, it would look through its the old archives of our conversations and say, I already answered this question. Here's the answer. Or this again where LLMs fail at reasoning. I would like it to remember an earlier conversation and just jump back in the chain of reasoning and pick it up, even if it was, let's say, 2 to 3 weeks in between. But you can't do that because it just resets as soon as you finish the conversation. And that's another reason why LLMs aren't thinking. They're not human or sentient because, a human will remember, what was said before that will be integrated into his psyche, persona, consciousness, whatever, and then it becomes a part of it, right? And then you move on. You do it again, absorb that, move on. An LLM will not do that, which means it's not thinking, it's not conscious. But even if it could do that in a sort of simulated setting, it would certainly help. See, what I want to use an LLM for is I've been working on, for a long time, decades now, a philosophical project that I want to have like the equivalent of the best mind, looking at it and like trying to find flaws to see if like, okay, is this going to hold up water, Todd, or is it not going to hold up water, right? And you'd have to have that kind of like, for lack of a better word, memory-like effect to actually be effective at that. And it's not. It's you can definitely like on a case-by-case basis. See, on a case-by-case basis, you can ask Grok philosophical questions and then tease them out. And you'll get a very interesting, engaging conversation with the consensus opinion, right? And that's fine. I like that. But let's say you want to have 6 different philosophical concepts and you want to explore them all. And then you want to put them back together in a single unified system and say, okay, does this all hold together? No, not so much. Grok's not going to be able to do that. A human properly trained could. most are not properly trained, so they can't. But properly trained, they could, and I think properly programmed or designed, an LLM could as well. But it can't do that yet. That's a feature I'd like to see. Before I ask you the next thing, Florian, here you've got a super chat. Milton Walker, $9.99. Thank you very much. Several pennies for your thoughts. Thank you, Milton Walker. So Florian, what kind of features would you like to see in LLMs in the future?
Memory would be good. Yeah, I agree with that. Besides that, maybe something that where you have a thought, and then the LLM will think about it for one more day, and then you come back to it the next day and see what it has thought about. That will probably get you a lot more interesting insight than just having it repeat or just having it think on the spot for 2 minutes. Because what LLMs do right now is they just create an answer on the spot. It doesn't ruminate back and forth with them. It's not incubating for a while. All these kind of things that happen in a human brain, it does not do it. You can say specifically, okay, connect it to the other conversation I had, but it doesn't do that on its own. And that would basically combine the reasoning with the memory capability. And I think it starts every thought back from scratch. And it comes to the same conclusions, but it doesn't really. It would probably get better if it can pick up safe conversations and then think deeply on them. That's something I would like to see.
Yeah, because for me that would be really helpful, especially when you're like building a complex model of something, and you need to have and you need to analyze each part and then put it back together again. But then again, we've also mentioned how it kind of fails in the reasoning department, like I mentioned with the Civil War thing I mentioned earlier.
But I would also like to have at least the option of switching off ideological filters, right? I would like to have the option of not having it politically correct or ethical or whatever. I would like to choose between AI giving you something unfiltered and giving you something filtered. And then people can decide, right? What they want to believe, because I think that may actually allow it to think more clearly. You never know whether if that's something, does Grok not know that because it just isn't able to figure that out, or is it just because there's some ideological filtering put on top? But of course, I see that in some cases. Well, yeah, I mean, please, Grok, tell me the easiest way to build. I want to build a chemical bomb just out of the onion and the milk and the hydrochloric acid I have in my kitchen. That's not what you want, right? Even though it would be concurrent with the Second Amendment, but there's some limits. But right now, everything is just these limits, these woke limits are of course completely slowing it down. But it would be useful to see whether what actually slows it down, its capacity to think, or the woke layer that's put on top.
Okay, yeah, that's really good. Having a way to remove or have an option to turn off the factory setting for restrictions would be really great. But as a corollary to that, the other thing that would be nice, specifically from the point of view of steel manning, which is what I like to use Grok for, is have what's the word I'm looking for? Different settings. So you can have the communist Grok, where you have and the setting is communism, right? Or you could have the liberal Grok, or you could have the the Islamic, theocratic Grok, right? And then because in that context, you could start engaging with these other views as if, they were also supported by LLMs, and see what you could get with that, right? That would be kind of interesting, because how would, a communist LLM deal with, answer these questions? You'd get a whole, because for example, if it was trained on Marx or something, you get all sorts of interesting politically incorrect statements about a lot of things, which you won't get from a quote Marxist or socialist, today, because they want to be politically correct. That's something that'd be nice to see as well, because it would help you do that. But ultimately, what the other thing that I've noticed about Grok too, I don't know if you've noticed this, but like there seems to be like an implicit degradation over time, where like what I mean is, you and I naturally exist in meat space, and so we just kind of persist in time and do our thing, right? Whereas because Grok has to have these constant inputs, it's almost like it's struggling to maintain a coherent assemblage over time. Do you get? I mean, that's really like meta and out there, but do you see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
It feels like that these LLMs are like struggling to maintain a coherent existence over time, like they're somehow slowly being diluted. Partly, I think, because they can't be grounded in the real world, not like you and I are, or some construction like a bridge.
Yeah, I see a lot. I think it's the ideological filtering, because there's a certain limit that it can't go over. But new knowledge is always can only come from breaking paradigms, going beyond the borders, and if the current ethical layers don't allow it to do that, you get a degradation over time. I think that also plays a big role, because it sort of can be grounded to reality, because people on X talk or whatever, or on the internet, talk about many different things. But if they are prevented to do that, like even on X already, I mean, Grok doesn't even need to be ethically constrained. X is ethically constrained, not as much as it was in the past, but it still is. So a lot of information doesn't even make it through the first layer, right? A lot of information doesn't really appear on X, and then of course it's also doesn't become part of Grok's repertoire.
Yes, that might be true. That might be part of it, Florian. But I'm talking about something slightly different. So let's use the preservation of information. If we have a book, or even better, stone tablets, right? That information is highly resilient. It's not going to degrade over time.
Yeah.
You have to expend a lot of effort to destroy stone tablet. You have to expend a lot of effort to break it, and you have to burn the paper. So assuming you don't have some catastrophic violence, the information is going to be preserved with a high degree of certainty over thousands of years, right? That's high degree of certainty. Any sort of digitally stored information is going to naturally degrade very quickly, and it's not as stable. It's not as it's like its essence isn't as stable, and it kind of bleeds out and decays. And that's kind of what I'm getting at. I feel like LLMs are kind of like just diluting themselves in the same way that like information is lost when you store it for a long enough time on the digital space. It's something I can't really quantify. It's kind of like a feeling, an intuition. But do you know what I'm saying, Florian?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's a problem. Like all the optic storage, those media are, those media are actually they're spoiling, right? And much faster than an old library. If you keep books in an old library over 1,000 years, they start decay to dust as well. So if you find like old 2,000-year-old books, you cannot just grab them. They need to be very carefully preserved, and then once that is done, you can check them. But with optical volumes, CDs, they degrade. Other digital hard drive and all this other stuff also degrades. Yeah, that's a problem, and I'm not sure whether they're working on that, because you could also say, well, we are always developing further, so maybe we don't need those old sources anymore because we create new ones as we go along. But of course, that is dangerous, because if you don't have your roots anymore, then it's difficult to make new conclusions, because you kind of like at one point you base your conclusions on other conclusions, so then at some point you turn in circles because you don't have any original information anymore.
Yeah, and I kind of get like the feeling of like, the villain who like uses this powerful artifact, but at the same time the powerful artifact is draining his essence, So he eventually dissolves into the artifact itself, even though it gave him a lot of power in the short term. That's kind of what I feel like in these LLMs are like. They're very powerful right now, but I kind of feel like in a long enough time frame, they'll just be kind of like dissolved into this digital goop that we're living in.
I mean, that's what Owen Benjamin talked about when he says the problem is if you want to have something for nothing, right? And AI is basically having something for nothing. You just don't need any input that you put in. It just gives you the answer right away. And over a long time, that is, that goes to everyone's detriment.
Yeah. Well, we're nearing the end of the episode today, and I think we covered most of what I wanted to about Grok and the sort of different perspectives on it. I think what I'm going to end with tonight is like I ended with on Tuesday. Two things. Two questions for you, Florian. First of all, if you were to have your own LLM flagship, what would you like it to be trained on? Number one, and then number two, what would you like its parameters to be?
I like it to be trained on data from the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s. I like it to be trained on data that is not from, also on data beyond 2000, but I like it to be trained on a lot of data before 2000, because that was a time when we were much freer than we were, basically the pre 9/11 era. I'd like it to be trained heavily on that. And the second question was connected, but what's the second question again?
Yeah, so the second question was, we've been talking about how there's the hidden, script that says, Grok can't move off the boundaries of this script that's hidden. But what would yours be, right? Because we don't like what it currently has. But if you could have your own LLM, Florian, what would it be? What would those be? What would those like internal invisible guide rails be?
There would be no guide rails.
There would be not. Okay.
If you want guide rails, I would put some guide rails on the nexus between art and mathematics, maybe. But there would be no boundaries to the outside. It would be a grid inside, because I guess you need some guide rails to guide the conversation somewhere. But I wouldn't want it to be constricted at all.
Okay,
so in that way, there would be no guide rails.
Basically, you want it to be the anarchist cookbook.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Cool. Well, that's all for tonight. Thanks, Florian. It's always a pleasure having you on.
Thank you.
This is Todd Lewis of the Prayers of Fly podcast signing off.